Hi, everyone. My name is Priscilla Piper, and welcome to the Decision to Dance podcast. Today, I am talking about what my ideal dance class looks like. I talk a little bit about filming, groups, the length of class, little things that if I could hand pick and create my ideal class, what would that look like? And I feel like if any of you are teachers out there, I think it's just good perspective to take note of. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. My ideal dance class is at a minimum an hour and a half. Minimum an hour and a half. I am a big fan of the master classes that are like 2 hours long, 2.5 hours long, maybe longer, and I would pay more for longer classes for sure. That goes for any style, any class. It doesn't matter. An hour is not long enough. An hour and 15 is acceptable. I will take that. But for me, my ideal class is a minimum of an hour and a half. That goes for a ballet class, that goes for a tap class, that goes for any class. An hour goes by way too quickly, in my opinion. And I recognize that there's limitations when people are scheduling studio time and people's schedules and all of that. I understand. So that brings me to my next point. In addition to that, I love a class that has a warm up. And I can't really comment on how long I prefer the warm up to be because I'm not in class often enough right now to provide those details. But because of the lack of warm ups that are provided out there, I'm just going to go ahead and say I'll take any warm up at all, if I'm being completely honest. Now, when I say warm up, I prefer a warm up that is led by the instructor and or their assistant. I am not a huge fan of warming up on your own or improving to a song as a way of warming up. That's just what I grew up in, so I'm always going to love that because I grew up always doing a warm up. And that's important also to like save your body, especially as you get older. In addition to that, if there are things in the combination that we are going to do that requires a bit more stress on the body, for example, if you know you're going to do a middle split and you're going to roll through the middle split, please let us stretch out our middle splits. That's how I pulled my groin. We did a warm up, did not do splits at all. And then there was a combo that we did where it was like turned into the middle split and we rolled through it. I have now learned always be completely stretched. Always go in, unfortunately, anticipating there not being a warm up. So that's just how I go in now, and I have to do that because I have to save my body. I have been through it too many times where I've relied on the class, the teacher, to provide a warm up, and then it negatively impacting me later on. So I take it upon myself to make sure I warm up my body and do what I need to do. But that's tough because sometimes you do a warm up and then you still have to commute to your class. So then you end up sitting and having to re-warm up. So please have a warm up. And if there's specific things that you are including in your choreography that requires certain muscles to be extra stretched, please, please, please be mindful of that. Next, I would say across the floor. I love an across the floor. Again, that's what I grew up in, so I'm gonna love it. It's a nice way to like ease into class, to go from warm up to across the floor. You're kind of like getting ready for the combination. It just is a nice way to get the ball rolling and get into class. You're doing, a couple counts of eight across the floor, and then eventually that leads you to the combo. That is not really something you see that often, at least from my experience, but I love across the floor. So now let's get into groups. So we learned the choreography, and I'm a big fan of when teachers give you enough time to do the combo in groups. And so when we break up into groups, that means to me that I am now going to have enough space for me to go completely full out. And I love when a teacher does that early on. And what I have found is that when teachers are more old school, they do that. But teachers that aren't don't always allow you that time for groups right away. It's more so towards the end of class, which I think is really fascinating. I don't know why that's the case, but it's what I've observed and have experienced. It's a little mind boggling to me. I'm not really sure how we got there. It probably partly, or a lot of it has to do with the lack of time in class. So that goes back to my first point of class should always be, ideally, in my opinion, an hour and a half. Then, when we break up into groups, being mindful of how large those groups are. And again, I recognize that time is a factor in this, but I really get frustrated when we break up into groups. And again, that means to me that I get to go full out. We break up into groups, and there's still not enough space. I still can't go full out. That really frustrates me because I'm like, well, I just marked the entire class. And I do recognize that I've got to work through that in some way because I know that sometimes there are so many people in a class that you really don't have much room around you at all. And I know there are ways to be full out, but I always feel like I can't be full out because I always feel like I'm going to hit somebody. I would prefer if we do 4 groups and you can tell we're still on top of each other, break it up into 6. That would be my suggestion. So if you only have an hour, then you don't have much time for a warm up, you don't have much time for across the floor, you don't even have much time to be teaching the combo, let alone doing it in groups over and over again. I don't know if enough teachers are mindful of that, and I'm curious what goes through their heads when they are dividing into groups, and I wonder when they're doing that if they think there's plenty of space, even though to the dancer it feels like there's not, and or is it just there's not a lot of time, so this is the time that we have, and make the most of what you have and go full out, figure it out, make it work. That's also very much quite possible. I love a smaller group. I love when we can do groups over and over and over again so that I can get the combo out of me. But again, I know that there is a way to be full out and still get the most out of class, even if you aren't doing it in groups at all. That's something that I do struggle with a bit. So that's something I'm going to be working on that will be ongoing. Okay, so another piece is that I just love being challenged, and that's not really dependent on a certain type of class. That's kind of dependent on where you are in your process and what type of classes and teachers you are selecting from to take from. But I love a challenge. I don't enjoy when things are easy, which is not really often that I feel that way, but I just love when things feel a little tiny bit out of reach and it's a little bit of a push. So I love, and I feel like a lot of people don't like this, which is really fascinating to me, and I don't know 100%, but this is my assumption. But I love when a teacher calls people out individually. I love when a teacher's like, you, specifically, you, you're doing this wrong. It needs to be da. Fix this. Even if it's not to me, which I love when it is to me, but if it's not to me, I can still take the direct feedback that that teacher is providing to that student and take a mental note and be like, oh, am I doing that? Am I doing it wrong or am I doing it right? But I do love when a teacher's like, hey, Priscilla, make sure this is what you're doing, whatever the critique is. I love it. I will say that doesn't mean it's always easy to take doesn't mean that it's always comfortable. Sometimes even when you get feedback from teachers, it's I've had experiences where I'm like not quite understanding what they're saying. And so that can be kind of frustrating. Like they're asking you to fix something and you think you understand, but when you're executing it, it's not going the way that you think it should be. So it looks like you're not paying attention, but I very much enjoy the process of getting feedback, just even if it's 0.01% more than the discomfort that I feel when I do have that attention on me and that teacher's calling me out. And I think, especially like the day after or 2 days after, I feel even better about the fact that received that critique in class. Then sometimes in that moment, it can feel a little like uncomfortable, but I would say overall, even in that moment, I'm still like, ooh, like I'm excited. Like you're about to tell me something that I can fix and make better. And that's always just how I've been. So I love when a teacher personally calls out people and gives them direct feedback. I also love when a teacher gives feedback to the group, to the class, which I feel like most teachers do, because you want to make the combo as good as you can possibly make it. Filming. So, whew, filming. What a topic that is. It's so fascinating, my thoughts and how they have evolved over time, because I was so like against filming when I returned to dance because I hated it so much and I wasn't used to it. Now I recognize the importance of it. I don't mind it. I expect it. I'm not surprised by it anymore. I used to always be like in my head, like, oh my gosh, we're filming? Like, come on. But now I'm like, no, like, it's how it goes. I'm gonna actually be surprised if we don't film at this point. I would say my preference is probably just like a phone camera, honestly. A little bit more subtle, a little bit more low key. But if we are gonna do the whole shebang, we're gonna have a camera person come in and film. There's one of two ways I like for this to go. So, one is if we're in a larger class, I prefer just a handful of groups to be called, like 3, maybe even 5, where it's like the best of the best. I want to see the best of the best dancers in that class do the combo and get called out. That's what I want to see. If that's not the case, I do feel like if you are choosing to film more than 50% of class, of the people in the classroom, you should be, in my opinion, filming every single person. Now, I know this is always a hot topic. People have so many opinions on this. I understand. But when you're in a class and more than 50% of the dancers get called out to be filmed, and it doesn't end up being 100% of the dancers in class that gets filmed, it's pretty uncomfortable. I have been in classes where it's like 95 plus percent of the class gets called out to be filmed, and I'm one of the few that don't. It's like if you called out everybody else in class except for me and another person, I'm so bad that I don't deserve to get filmed. But the other 48 are good enough to be filmed. That just rubs me the wrong way and doesn't make any sense to me. At that point, when you're including almost everybody, you should include everybody. And I also recognize that sometimes you do forget people, but I think you should always give the option for people to, like, oh, did I miss anybody? You know? I think it makes a difference when the teacher is intentional about their decisions when they're filming, and you can just feel that as a dancer, no matter what decisions they make. I will say, when I was in LA, I took a class from a teacher, and I really loved the way this teacher handled the camera. She called out many groups. These were large groups, but many groups to be filmed. And then she says, okay, if I didn't call you to be filmed and you want to be filmed, come out. So then there was a group that danced. And then after that, she was like, okay, If you didn't get called out to be filmed and you didn't go in the last group, come out. So, in other words, there were people that could have gone in that last group that chose not to. And she recognized that and she was like, okay, it's your turn now. And so we all watched that last group, and there were some really great dancers in that group. And it was like, wow, these people almost didn't dance at all. First of all, they weren't given the opportunity. Well, they were given the opportunity to film, but they weren't initially called out. And usually that means you're not as good if you weren't initially called out, right? And then some of these people like were too scared to even come out when given the opportunity to do it. And there were just some like really good dancers in that group, and it was just like, wow, like just because you don't get called out to be filmed doesn't mean that you're not a great dancer. So I hate that we put that pressure on ourselves. We got to stop that. So, yeah, if I had to say in how filming goes, I would say it's either a handful of groups or it's the whole class. And I recognize again the timing thing. If you don't have a lot of time, then you're handling that a bit differently. But if you have time to film 95%, you have time to film the other 5%. That's my opinion anyway. I'm not trying to start a whole argument over this. Um, I know people have so many different opinions, and your opinion would vary based off of if you're a teacher, the different types of classes offered, maybe even the different locations. Like, how do they vary based off of LA, New York, Atlanta, all of that? Like, I don't know. So many things to consider. And if I had to pick small or big class, I don't know. I kind of love both. I kind of love the feeling of both. I think getting that variety is really nice. Sometimes it's really nice to have that more intimate experience, but then I also love large classes and being just like that energy feels different when there's a lot of people in the room. Granted, that does come with some other challenges like having enough space and all of that, but I think it's too hard for me to pick one or the other. I think I love both in their own ways, so I think it's nice to get that variety. And then I guess I'll end it with a nice little cool down. I think that's a forgotten piece of the class as well, just like a 2 minute breathe, you know. It is nice to actually cool down your body in the rare situations where there is a nice little cool down. I realize like, oh, how important that is and how much better I feel after class when I do have a moment to like breathe and relax and get my muscles to slow down. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a little bit more casual than the other ones, but I think a good conversation to have with other people. And I'm curious what conversation you have with your friends about the same topic, if your friends would agree with the way that you prefer to have class or not. Could be a good conversation to have. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.